Hi, I'm Judi Friedman, and I'm chairperson of PACE, People's Action for Clean Energy. We're the largest clean energy, all-volunteer group in Connecticut, and we work very closely with national and international organizations on clean energy issues. We think energy is the number one issue of our time, and in a holistic way, it affects everything: economics, health, the future, the unborn generations, the beauty of our land, everything. And our organization is devoted to three principles. The first is to promote the development of renewable energy sources. That means energy from the sun, from wind, from small hydro, from any clean source, squeaky clean source. The second principle of our organization is energy efficiency and conservation. We believe that the win-win cheapest way to affect a sea change in our energy picture is to embrace energy efficiency and conservation. And third, we're very concerned about polluting energy sources. We are violently, adamantly opposed to nuclear power. We think that nuclear power is probably the worst idea that humankind has ever envisioned since it has been on this earth. And the waste that will affect thousands and thousands of unborn generations represents a terrible, terrible deal we've made with the future, and we want to stop that technology as quickly as possible. We're also concerned about fossil fuels, about global warming, about greenhouse gases, about the very high cancer and asthma rates in our state. I know so many children that suffer from asthma now, and it shouldn't be, and much of it comes from our energy sources. So we're working very hard on that. This is an example of the kind of home we would envision for Connecticut. Here are solar electric panels. Here's they're supplying the electricity. Here is solar hot water panels. This is roof venting. We have deciduous trees in the front letting in sunlight to heat the house with passive solar energy, evergreen trees in back to shield from the cold winds, bermed in back. But not everyone can have a house like that. We totally understand that. But what they can do is buy green energy and go to cleanenergy.com and buy green energy through their electric company. Those are very, very exciting technologies. Those are win-win technologies. And we can all change light bulbs. That's another thing we can do. Just simply changing from an incandescent bulb to compact fluorescent will lower energy bills, will reduce our pollution, will reduce demand for polluting sources. So these are all wonderful, wonderful ideas in Connecticut. Probably, as I mentioned before, our deepest concern is nuclear power. We have New Millstone plant in Waterford and plants, and they are very, very dangerous. They are subject to terrorism. A terrorist attack on Millstone could render much of our state uninhabitable, or a terrorist attack on some of our neighboring nuclear plants. These plants emit radioactive isotopes that are extremely unhealthy, especially for children and the unborn a long, long time from now. In fact, the nuclear industry considers us all as dose receptors. They calculate a certain amount of people may be hurt by the technology. This is madness. Connecticut Yankee nuclear plant, which is now closed, worked for 28 years only, and its waste will be lethal for generations. Today we have two guests with us. They're experts, and we are so delighted that they've made the effort to come to Connecticut. On my right is Kevin Kamps. He is a nuclear waste specialist from the Nuclear Information Resource Service in Washington, D.C. And Kevin is here to tell us about the problems that our nuclear plants have, are, and will create for all of us, and what's happening to these wastes, what will be the future of them, and how they'll affect us. And then further on my right is Vanessa Pierce. Vanessa Pierce has come all the way from Utah, far away, a faraway place, far out west. Well, we think it's so far away that we're sending our nuclear waste to her. And I wanted her to come today so you can see the face of this lovely young person who is trying to do something about the nuclear waste issue in her state, because we have already sent our poisons to her, and yet they come from only having made 28 years of electricity. So, Kevin, let me ask you first. People are, they don't understand maybe, or some people don't understand nuclear waste. What is it? How is it made? How will it affect them? How will it affect their children? Can you tell us a little about your take on the nuclear waste problem?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and it comes from what you said about Connecticut Yankee only operating for a couple decades and the waste that's left over, a quote from a colleague in Michigan, Michael Keegan, with the Coalition for Nuclear-Free Great Lakes. He says that nuclear power generates electricity as a fleeting byproduct, but the actual product is forever deadly radioactive waste. And you mentioned a lot of problems with nuclear power, but my job at Nuclear Information and Resource Service is focused on the high-level radioactive waste issue, so I'll talk about that. What high-level radioactive waste is the nuclear fuel rods that come out of a reactor core. So they go into a reactor core already radioactive and also toxic, but they come out 1,000,000 times more radioactive than when they went in. So before the nuclear fuel goes into a nuclear reactor, nuclear workers can actually work with it. They may wear gloves, they may wear a paper suit, but they can handle it and be around it. But when it comes out of a reactor core, it is deadly radioactive, and you need very thick radiation shielding between you and it, or it will kill you in a matter of seconds or minutes. So where the waste has been stored all these years is most often in the pools of water, which are indoors at these nuclear power plants.
So you're telling me that in Waterford, Connecticut, we have these pools of water with this very deadly material in it. Is that correct?
That's right. These are 40-foot deep pools of water. They're actually chemically treated. Boric acid solutions are poured into the water. The boron is a neutron absorber, and it provides more radiation shielding. The water also provides radiation shielding. This is to protect the nuclear workers who work around the pool. They're still receiving radiation doses from the waste, but it's not a deadly dose. But it is harmful.
But Kevin, what would happen if the water in that pool, for some reason, water levels suddenly dropped?
Well, you're right. Pool storage is very problematic. It's very risky. Those cooling pumps that circulate the water have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for decades on end to keep this very radioactive material thermally cool and to provide radiation shielding because it's radioactively decaying, it's emitting radiation. If the water were to be lost, and that could happen through an accident or a terrorist attack, we could have a catastrophe worse than Chernobyl in the United States. There's decades worth of radioactive waste in these pools. At a lot of nuclear plants in the country, the pools have filled to capacity. They can't be crammed any more full with waste. And at these plants, the older waste is moved outdoors into silos of concrete and steel. They're called dry casks. They're 20 feet tall. And more plants are turning to dry cask storage. Connecticut Yankee, which is shut down for about a decade now, has dismantled its pool. There is no pool there anymore, but there are dry casks.
So this is, I think, at Haddam and Haddam Neck.
Yes.
And then there are dry casks with high-level nuclear waste. And are they sitting outside? Is that correct?
They're outdoors. The reason they're called dry casks is because it does not use water And what it depends on for thermally cooling this still very hot waste that may be decades out of the reactor at this point is passive air cooling. They have vents in the bottom and vents at the top. They're shaped like giant cylinders. They're 20 feet tall. And this heat of the waste draws air from the outside in the bottom vent. It passes over the inner canister holding the waste, carries the heat out the top vent, and creates a natural airflow.
Is this something that a terrorist weapon could penetrate?
Unfortunately, dry cask storage was never designed with terrorism in mind. They are very vulnerable to an array of potential terrorist attacks, from crashing airplanes to anti-tank missiles, which are designed to penetrate much thicker metal than these containers are made out of. And the concrete radiation shielding around the containers, an anti-tank missile could literally vaporize. So we are calling for these dry cask storage installations across the country to be fortified against terrorist attack, but also to have very basic safety precautions applied to them, like radiation monitors. These dry casks at Connecticut Yankee do not have individual radiation monitors on them. They also do not have heat monitors. The companies are doing this to save money, and what they depend on is walk-by inspections, people with radiation monitors in hand to make sure there's no leakage, and heat monitors to make sure it's not overheating. But those inspections could be a day apart. At one shut-down nuclear plant in Michigan, the Big Rock Point nuclear plant, again, there's no pool. It's been taken away. All that's left are the dry casks. And unfortunately, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission allows for once every 2-week walk-by inspections. They could have a radiation leak going on for 14 days. They could have an overheating incident going on for 2 weeks and not even know about it.
I do feel glad about our Attorney General last year spoke out about wanting more security at nuclear plants. When you think about 9/11 and one of those planes could, the one that crashed, could have been going to a nuclear plant, and the devastation caused by a big plane going in a nuclear plant would be beyond belief. This is a map that we have distributed that always interests people very much. It's what if Chernobyl happened in Connecticut? And these red dots are nuclear plants operating in the Northeast and the Middle West. And any one of them could be a terrorist target, and the ramifications, depending on the rain and wind, of course, are just unbelievable. For instance, at the Chernobyl plant, 18 miles away, there was a complete evacuation of all residents, and that area is all uninhabitable. So that would mean if down in the Waterford, New London area, all uninhabitable. 78 miles, that includes Hartford and most of Connecticut. Children were evacuated and the water was contaminated. Very, very frightening scenario. Now, Vanessa, we were just talking about Connecticut Yankee. What a horrible, I'll put in quotes, gift have we as Connecticut, we are responsible. We use this electricity. What horrible gift have we sent to you?
Well, Utah is the home to what's known as a low-level radioactive waste dump site. Low-level waste should not be mistaken with low-hazard waste. In fact, every radionuclide found in high-level waste can also be found in low-level waste. The primary difference is mainly the concentration of these different radionuclides. So the waste that was sent to Utah wasn't the high-level waste that Kevin was just describing. It was a lot of the waste that was near the reactor and irradiated by it. A lot of it looks like construction debris because you can't see radiation. But this stuff is so dangerous that it has to be removed from civilization and put somewhere. And unfortunately, Utah has become the carpet under which most of the U.S. nuclear waste is swept in terms of waste generated by commercial utilities. We accept 97% of the commercially generated waste in the United States.
How do the people of Utah feel about that, Vanessa?
Not very good. We don't generate any of our electricity from nuclear power. We have never had a nuclear reactor. And we have a pretty difficult relationship with the nuclear industry because decades ago when the federal government first created nuclear weapons, and those weapons were actually created through processes that are also used for nuclear power, they tested those weapons when the winds were blowing towards Utah. And the Atomic Energy Commission actually said that Utah was a low-use segment population. And they said it was a good place to dump used razor blades. So we've become ground zero for a lot of the toxic and hazardous materials that the rest of the nation doesn't want. And what we're concerned about is that we're acting as an enabler for the creation of these dangerous, lethal wastes.
So as long as you accept it, then it continue to be made, and you're helping it be made. So what are you trying to do about that? And what are the people in your state who don't believe this is the right answer? What are you trying to do? How can you stop Connecticut from doing this to you?
Well, we're working, first of all, to prevent this out-of-sight, out-of-mind mentality. So I think part of our strategy is to work with other groups to get people to think about where is our electricity coming from, who benefits from it, and who bears the liabilities and the risks of the electricity that we enjoy. Part of it is just getting people to ask that question. The majority of our work, however, is focused on watchdogging the nuclear waste dump in Utah. It calls itself Energy Solutions, which is an interesting name because they basically are the mega mart of the nuclear waste industry. We're working to make sure that the operations they have out there are meeting regulatory standards.
How do you do that? What do you have, people who actually go out with meters and record the radiation? Well, how do you watchdog that?
Officially, going out there is the job of Utah's Division of Radiation Control, which is a state agency within our Department of Environmental Quality. What we do is actually go in and review the records that have been submitted to the regulators. And our job requires just as much watchdogging the regulators as it does watchdogging the industry itself, because unfortunately, companies like Energy Solutions and other waste sites like that have a very cozy relationship with those agencies that oversee them. In fact, Energy Solutions first opened up under a different name by getting permission from the state regulator to open their facility, and later it was found out that there was $600,000 that had been given to the head regulator by the owner of this company. That money was transferred in the form of Swiss bank account transfers, gold coins, real estate, and this bribery extortion scandal has plagued our concerns about the safety of this operation ever since it opened up. Furthermore, the former head of the Division of Radiation Control went on to work as the vice president for this nuclear waste dump. So half of our job is watchdogging to make sure that the regulators really are doing their job. The other half of our job is to bring to the people of Utah the question, do we want to make nuclear waste the industry in Utah that drives our economy? Or would we rather push for outdoor recreation? The ski industry is huge, and we're also working, much like you, to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency, which can create a lot of local jobs, and the money can stay there in the local economy. So we've been working to do a couple things to promote better policies when it comes to nuclear waste. One is that we've banned certain types of hotter nuclear waste from coming to the state. Secondly, we're working to prevent this nuclear waste dump, which is roughly a square mile in size, from expanding. So they wanted to double in size geographically. We prevented that from happening. Now they want to expand in size vertically, And we're also working to prevent that from happening because, like you, we agree that if you make your mess, it should be your responsibility to clean it up.
Recently, the Hartford Courant had an editorial urging Connecticut, the Department of Energy, to get Connecticut's nuclear wastes that are stored here in the state sent to Yucca Mountain. We did not agree with that position and feel very strongly that this is not the, what shall I say, just way to solve the waste problem. And there seem to be problems with Yucca Mountain. Now, can you tell us, can we send all our nuclear waste from Connecticut, just get rid of it, get it out of our state, send it across the country, and send it to Yucca Mountain, which is in Nevada, about 60 miles west of Las Vegas? Is that a good idea?
No, it's a really bad idea, but it's been pushed for decades now. Yucca Mountain, Nevada was first singled out as the proposed national dump site for high-level radioactive waste in 1987 by a law called the Screw Nevada Bill. That was the name used by the people promoting the bill, even. So it's a very bad idea. The geology of the site is very unsuitable. It's an earthquake zone. It has volcanic activity. There's a drinking water supply below the proposed dump site. One of Nevada's most vibrant farming communities is about 15 or 20 miles downstream in Amargosa Valley, Nevada. And they export dairy products, for one thing, up and down the West Coast. So many millions of people in California, for example, in Los Angeles, are drinking milk from Amargosa Valley, Nevada. So if waste is buried, if high-level radioactive waste from commercial nuclear power plants, from the Department of Energy weapons complex, is buried at this leaky site, it will leak into the drinking water supply. It will contaminate the dairy products from Amargosa Valley, and a lot of people could suffer serious health damage from this over time, especially in the distant future, because the Department of Energy now realizes how bad the site is geologically and are depending entirely on the waste burial containers to contain the radioactivity at that site. What's going to happen is water infiltrating the mountain, rainwater, will corrode away those waste burial containers and will leach out the radioactivity and will flow with the water. And this would be a disaster, not only for Nevada, but for others on that food chain. And in addition to the problems with the site itself is the fact that waste would have to be moved all the way across the country.
Can you imagine that? Trucks and trains all across the country moving this high-level waste across our country. They're prone, it would be ideal terrorist targets, moving it to Nevada. It just seems insane. Do you agree with that?
Well, 45 states plus the District of Columbia have Yucca-bound transportation routes targeted within their states. And like you said, atomic waste trucks, atomic waste trains. If trucks were used, it would take 50,000 shipments of high-level waste.
50,000 shipments of high-level waste across this country to Yucca Mountain.
But the Department of Energy has said that it prefers to use rail shipments, so we're talking more like 10,000 large rail casks. And just to give folks an idea of how much radioactivity we're talking about here, every single one of those 10,000 rail casks would contain 240 times the long-lasting radioactivity that was released by the Hiroshima atomic bomb. That's
could you say that just slowly one more time?
Well, it works the same for the Connecticut Yankee dry casks, which are still on site. So there are 43 of these very large dry casks at Connecticut Yankee. The proposal for moving those is to barge them down the river onto Long Island Sound, bring them into New Haven, put them on a train, and send them across dozens of states to get out to Nevada. Every single one of those 43 containers at Connecticut Yankee contains over 200 times the long-lasting radiation that was released at Hiroshima. And that's a conservative figure because it only refers to the radioactive cesium isotopes. That's 5 of the hundreds of radioactive poisons in this waste.
Oh, it's just incredible.
And I should add about the Yucca Mountain site that it's Western Shoshone Indian land. It's sacred to them, and it's their homeland by the Treaty of Ruby Valley of 1863, which the United States government signed. So not only is it scientifically unsuitable, it's also legally and morally unsuitable as well.
It's appalling to me to think about the low-level waste, the high-level waste, the low-level waste, the short time this waste helped to generate electricity, the terrible problems. What are the solutions, Kevin?
Well, in mid-September of this year, there was a House hearing on Capitol Hill about radioactive waste policy, and Michelle Boyd from Public Citizen was invited to be a panelist. She works on these issues in coalition with really hundreds of groups across the country, yours, mine, Vanessa's. And we all came together in a single document, which is entitled A Statement of Principles on Safeguarding Radioactive Waste at Reactors. And what we felt was important that we had to get across is that even if Yucca Mountain opens at the earliest possible date that the Department of Energy is saying, which is 2017, 11 years from now, it would take an additional 25 to 30 years to move the wastes out to Yucca Mountain. We're talking about the 2040s at this point. So that means that wastes are going to remain at places like Connecticut Yankee and Millstone for decades to come. They're vulnerable to accidents and terrorist attacks. So we have to, right now, spend the money to fortify the wastes against terrorist attack. We have to spend the money to safeguard the wastes against accidents.
How can we fortify these casts against? What can we do?
They need to be bunkered behind very thick fortifications.
So we need a cover for them. Is that what you're saying?
Concrete bunkering. And this is to deter an attack, for instance, by an anti-tank missile. There was a test done at the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1998 against a nuclear waste container used for transportation and storage on site. And the TOW anti-tank missile that was used obliterated the concrete shielding, it turned it to powder, and it blew away. And a second TOW missile put a hole in the nuclear waste canister's metal wall that was this big around. The hole went through 15 inches of metal and created a direct pathway for the radioactive waste to come out in the fire and the smoke, and to blow downwind and hurt people. So what's needed is very thick concrete shielding, and the details need to be worked out. We didn't spell out the details in our statement of principles, but shielding and fortification that's strong enough to deter a terrorist attack, to make a nuclear power plant and its wastes on site, including in the pool, not an attractive target for terrorist attack, because they can throw a very strong attack against it and only, hopefully, a small or no amount of radioactivity would escape. And that's going to take a great effort on the part of the industry, the government, and concerned citizens to protect these very deadly wastes.
This is something that is terribly important. Anyone who stayed listening to this show, thank you so much. This is about the future. This is about our children's 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 children unto potentially the 7,000th generation being injured in some way by short generation of electricity. I urge you to look at the PACE website. I urge you to embrace NIRS, the Nuclear Information Research Service. Look at their website and get in touch with H.E.A.L Utah and try to find a solution to this terrible, terribly serious problem, which many people cannot even think about or discuss, but is very, very urgent. So thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin, so
Thanks,
much.
Judy.
And thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks.
Wonderful.